What's important and what's not in today's Drayage community? Today we welcome a special guest to talk about these things, the effects and the repercussions, the regulations and the driver retention. My name is Chris Joslin and welcome to JOZ Bytes. Well, welcome again, everybody. This is Chris Joslin, your host, and welcome to JOZ Bytes, brought to you, as always, by www.iLevelLogistics.com, probably coming across your screen at this very moment. If not, it better be. Anyway, as always, we are trying to expand everyone's knowledge and horizon in terms of transportation logistics, sometimes globally, sometimes centered around the continental United States, and sometimes, as in today, focused on the LA Basin and the local drayage community there. We have a special guest today, and they are going to be, as we always do, trying to help us understand a little bit more of the complexities that go on in our industry, and at the same time, giving us a perspective of, how to run business. Because this isn't just about transportation logistics. It's about how to start, run, and manage your own thing. The entrepreneurs out there, the professionals within the industry, and those that in the future may want to do something, there are steps to take. There are things to do. There are things you need to understand and learn that will bring you to a point where you can have a successful business organization. Today we've brought in the managing entity of a company called Lightning Xpress up in the Los Angeles area. He'll talk a little bit about his company, I'm sure, but he is an absolute expert for a young man in the industry. But he ended up, like a lot of us do, in the transportation logistics supply chain world, and doggone it, now he's stuck here with the rest of us. And so in doing so, he has decided to allow us to take a peek inside of his daily life and see what he thinks about the world of Dray in Los Angeles. So welcome, Adan Zamora. So today we have a great guest to spend a little time with us today, talking about local trucking and drayage in Southern California. Mr. Adan Zamora, Vice President of Lightning Xpress. Welcome.
Hey, Chris. Glad to be on. Thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate your time today. I know how crazy things are out there in the LA Basin in terms of drayage. But what I was hoping to do today is just spend a little time getting to know you. Our audience is looking to find a feel about how things are going in different parts of logistics and transportation across the United States, across the world for that matter. And one of the most important places to be aware of and understand and learn about is Southern California, especially near the ports and the rail systems there. And if you could, maybe you could spend a few minutes just telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into this.
Yes, absolutely. So I like to say that I come from a family of truckers. My father was not a trucker. I actually have an uncle that introduced me to trucking. I've always been fascinated by 18-wheelers. As a little boy, I had a friend whose uncle owned a cab over triple axle, tandem axle truck, and he gave us a ride over to Long Beach in this thing, and I was just like, wow, these machines, we were right above the engine at that point, and it was something that kind of, made me think, well, how much money do these guys make, and what's their day like? As a kid, I must have been 7 or 8 years old. It was just fascinating. So that, excuse me, that was my introduction to big rigs. In my teen years, I had an uncle that was an owner-operator, owned his own big rig, and started his own company, actually. The name of the company was G&M Trucking, based out of Torrance, California. So one summer, he invited me to go work for him, keep me busy. And that's how I started, getting to know drivers, learn the ins and outs of dispatch, just being a paper chaser, starting from the bottom and working your way up. as I was introduced to that field, I said, hey, I think a lot of people can relate to this, especially dispatchers.
Hmm.
It's fast paced. And I think, in going to work, what we most look for is, nothing better than looking at the clock and half your day's over. It's like, man, I'll be home in a little while. So when I got my start, that was pretty much the case. It's like I'd get there, drink some coffee, and next thing you know, it's noon, and you're like, "This is awesome." I'm gonna go get to hang out with my friends in just a few hours here. So I think that's
Hmm.
what was my initial attraction to the field. Building relationships with people has always been pretty big for me. I was always very involved in extracurricular activities during my
Hmm.
my school years, middle school and high school. So
Hmm.
it was a good fit for me personality wise.
Right. Go, go, go kind of personality, right? And
Absolutely.
and certainly the drayage market in Southern California is just that. It's you got to always be nimble and always on the move and ready to do whatever it takes to get the job done for the company you work for, but also kind of for the industry as a whole. To there's so many pieces of it, and at the end of the day, the way I look at transportation overall is there's a lot of companies out there that spend a great deal of time looking at the analytics behind everything, crunching numbers, and all of us do that to some extent. But the touch point for your customer, shipper, receiver, port, rail, et cetera, always comes down to it's kind of the way I look at things is, there's a high tech side, but there's a high touch side. In the drayage component, getting those drivers where they go, when they're supposed to get there, they're they reflect who you are as a company. They're that important high touch part. And that's kind of the way I feel about it. But I don't what is your perspective on kind of the relationship between overall industry and that driver component?
You have to really immerse yourself. If I'm not a CDL, I'm not a driver, but I have seen very successful trucking companies. What they do very well is they put people in positions of, like for example, a driver liaison position, or a guy that oversees the entire safety department that happens to be a former driver that can really relate to these guys. If you are a 100 plus, 1,000 plus fleet unit trucking company, and you have people whose sole reason is to hear drivers feedback and understand what some of their struggles are, then you're really catering to those individuals. If you can really do that well as a trucking company, then you're going to be able to keep these guys on board. You want them to feel like they're not just a number. You want to listen to their pains and their aches and be able to address it in a way that makes their job a little bit easier, because reality is, they're in daily communication with the dispatch department, but dispatch is not in the field. Sometimes there's
Right.
many
Right.
variables out in the field that dispatch doesn't even find out about. So the more we know about the accounts we service, the shippers we service, how they cater to your drivers, your fleet, the better we can be as a trucking company to properly price business and also make it easy for our drivers to deal with.
So, with your company, I would imagine you're trying to balance things all over the place, probably spinning a lot of plates, as the saying goes. But I would think a lot of especially in Southern California, a lot of the regulations that are there, a lot of the regulations that come out and different things that are coming at the truckers in general, like hours of service and ELDs, things like that most people in our industry know about. You have to be able to understand what you can do within the time and constraints of those regulations. How do you guys handle that? How is number one is how is your company moving in those directions? How are you managing it?
Well, we manage it in a way where I think it all starts with understanding the pieces of business that you onboard as a company. It starts there. You want to understand what the requirements are, whether it be drop and hook business, whether it be live unload business, whether it's business that's coming out of the port, coming out of the railroads.
Hmm.
You kind of want to align the business you're onboarding with the hours of service and your capabilities. Not just that, but you even want to do it on a driver level, because there's certain drivers that adapt quickly to certain types of business, certain lanes. There's guys that like to head out of town. There's guys that like to stay local. Um, I like to
So it's
use.
really a person by person kind of thing you're talking about.
It is, I think, dispatchers don't like to have limitations in terms of where they send drivers and what they have them do. But I think a planning and dispatch department that functions very well understands their drivers very well and caters to that need so that you're harnessing people's strengths and
So
weaknesses.
I hope everybody out there is hearing that. Planning is it's something that I talk about all the time. And even when you don't have always a clear direction on where you need to go, from a day-to-day standpoint, getting through the efficiencies and the hours of a day and planning around the people and the personnel that you have, whether it's drivers or internal dispatchers, et cetera, is hugely important. Otherwise, you don't complete what you need to. You don't get, full utilization out of either your individual. And then the other thing Aiden is saying very clearly, at least what's coming to me, is that you kind of have to individualize the way you handle your personnel. You have to understand where they're coming from, what their needs are in terms of whether you want to get out of town more often and have a longer haul, whether it's short haul, whether it's drop and pull, all those kinds of things are important.
7 p.m. last night, I had a driver call me. He said, "Hey, you know what, Aiden? I don't know if this is working for me. Um,
Really.
because I've got a dispatch starts at 4:30 a.m. tomorrow, and I'm getting off, and it's 7 p.m. and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to get a 10-hour reset." And I go, "Well," I don't want to use the individual's name, but
Mm-hmm.
I go, driver A, let me see what we can do to adjust your schedule accordingly so you get your rest.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just don't know if I could do these early starts because here, let me tell you, I live in a neighborhood, man. He lives in Highland Park, actually, uh,
Mm-hmm.
area of Los Angeles that's it's urban.
Mm-hmm.
People are walking their dogs at 9 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
It's those are rolling hillsides. There's some wildlife there. You
Mm-hmm.
got just all sorts of things happening. Especially now today with the pandemic. People who are not working, staying up later, and so that area, because it is urban and it is populated. You've got ambulances, police trucks, police cruisers, I should say, rolling
Mm-hmm.
down the street and waking you up. It's like you don't get to bed till 10 o'clock. Then you've got to wake up at 3:30 to be at work by 4. That's no good for us either from a fleet perspective and safety. We want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure these guys are rested. And so it doesn't matter if you take down 2 cups of coffee on the way to work. Reality is,
Right.
they'll catch up to you by the end of the week.
Yeah.
So that was a phone call I had last night. I think, more and more you'll hear with, from these leaders of trucking companies that you have to be adaptable as a trucking organization. You really
Mm-hmm.
have to cater to truckers' needs in order to retain them. If you're
Yeah.
not nimble like that, if you're not willing to adapt or bring on pieces of business that are flexible enough so that you can place them in different areas depending on
Mm-hmm.
what their personal needs are, then you're just going to continue to have a turnover issue.
I had an article on the site that I put out. This is probably a couple of months ago, maybe, and maybe I did a podcast on it too. I'm not sure, but the title I gave it was driver centrism, and kind of thinking differently along those lines. And I know in the past, I mean, one of the things that baseline you always have to think about in terms of driver retention is the amount of pay they're getting, how they're getting paid, their frequency, all those kinds of things. And that's an important component about it. But the other side of it, which you've just mentioned very eloquently, is you've got to not predict how every driver will react, but understand that they're all different. And it goes back to the high touch thing we talked about. Certainly as a company, I would imagine you're doing everything you can to build your company in a way that is efficient and structured so that your internal dispatch and your customer service people understand what needs to be done and they can do the same things over and over, because that's how you build efficiency. But at the same time, give your drivers leeway to do the things that are in their core competency, the things they want to do and get paid well for.
Absolutely, Chris. A lot of the conversations I have with driver candidates that come through these doors relates to pay. I think at the end of the day, one's household needs to be taken care of in order for them to function well in their job, work comfortably, and be a top performer. Because if your house is not in order, then you're not going to be a good, employee at work.
Right.
It's drag on you. I think that goes across the board in any industry, any kind of job. But these guys, I really try to relate to them in terms of pay. I mean, hey, I've got a job, I've got a household, a family, kids, and a wife. Um, if they're family men, if they're not, I mean, even if they're not, if they've got a dog, whatever it is, those things got to be taken care of. Their dog needs food. Sometimes their
Yeah,
dog's a road dog.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
very common amongst truck drivers.
Yeah.
We've not encountered a situation yet where somebody is asking us, hey, can I bring, you know, bubbles on my daily trips? We don't have a no pet policy, so
Yeah.
absolutely, hey, bring him or her on board.
Well,
Uh,
there's a whole there's you go on Instagram and such. There's a whole world of truckers out there that all are shooting pics of their pets and different things. Like it's there's a certain mentality it takes, I think, as you said when you were a kid. You were amazed at these giant machines people were jumping in and driving all over, and you've got to be a certain kind of mindset person to want to jump in the cab of this thing and run around in it all day.
hey,
Long
some of
and this is short haul we're talking about, but
we just don't want someone yapping at us all day.
yeah,
maybe
exactly,
maybe barking
exactly.
at you is a little
Maybe
more
barking, but not yapping, right?
yeah.
It's
But back to the pay conversation, I don't like to say to drivers, hey, this is what you can take home every week, because everybody's got a different tax situation, right? What I
hmm
like to say to them is this is what you can make at the end of the year,
hmm
before taxes. And really, in California, things are so expensive, and reality is, most people just want to cover their bills, but hey, we're not the kind of company that just wants to pay you enough to cover your bills. We're the kind of company that wants you to take some money
hmm
home, pay the bills, be able to take your kids to Disneyland, whenever you want.
hmm
And
right.
it's incredibly tough to do so in Southern California. I'd say this pre and post pandemic, because Disneyland is like $300 per person right now, but I'm sure that'll settle down at some point. What is meant is that these drivers need to make enough money to make a good living and enjoy their free time with their family. That's really, our focus is the drivers. Our focus is to make sure that these guys are proud to work here and are
hmm
getting a good paycheck.
Well, in these days, the driver uh, deficit is pretty significant, and I think there's a lot of contributing factors to that. But in terms of retention of drivers, in terms of what's going on out there, every time the oil industry booms or every time the housing industry booms, there is a significant drop in the number of drivers available for the industry. And I know on top of that, about a year ago, they put some more enforcement in place on the Administration for Drug and Alcohol, uh, looking at people, testing people more, putting a process in place for bringing people back aboard if they've tested it. My reading has said that there's some 50,000 drivers not in the industry today after a year of enforcing those policies that normally would be. And that's a great safety thing, because you don't want drivers out there, of course, that have these problems. But you've got to find somebody to fill those gaps.
Yeah, I believe what you're referring to is the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so we just had an audit with one of the state agencies here, and that was they're enforcing the compliance on that, and though it's a Fed mandated program, the state agencies are making sure that trucking companies, anybody who's got a fleet of trucks is properly
Right.
running the queries on there for drivers coming from other companies, and reporting when these drivers are either refusing or testing
hmm
positive in some of those cases. So
Right.
it is definitely at the front of the enforcement agencies. It really
hmm
the driver pool, the availability of drivers that has gone down as a result of this type of enforcement hurts our industry, but with safety in mind, I mean, I like to say we just had our quarterly safety meeting to, so these drivers, hey, those families next driving next door to you, that's somebody's wife, kid, just like yours,
hmm
don't put yourself in a position where something could happen to them. Think of them first.
Right.
So, you
Right.
know,
Right.
anybody who's doing drugs and on the road, it's just unacceptable. Can't happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, uh, there's so many different things we could talk about over the course of a half an hour of conversing about drayage in Southern California, and you could go in a million different directions. I mean, the regulations that are out there are one of the things that kind of drives me crazy because it seems, especially in Southern California, California regulatory wise likes to be the tip of the spear on everything. Certainly with the and I grew up in transportation here as well. So even over the course of my too many years in transportation, 30 plus years in transportation, I've seen a huge change in the air quality for the better in Southern California for a whole lot of reasons. But that does not mean that anybody's letting up pressure on that aspect of what we do. Certainly, the uh, age of the engines of trucks going into ports, et cetera, has been a compliance issue for years with the California Air Resource Board. Now they've gone ahead and decided to the South County Air Quality Management team has decided to implement, I think it was PR 2305 or something like that, which is that indirect source rule. I don't know if you know a lot about that, but just to throw it out there as part of this conversation, they are now going to be requiring warehouses, which have always had to have a certain compliance as far as their emissions is concerned, but they're looking at fugitive emissions from not just from those warehouses and the activity there, but from the truckers that come into those facilities. So if an Amazon warehouse or something will start to require truckers that are compliant with these rules and regulations to even do deliveries into there. Now, those kind of things are just little microcosms of things that affect drayage communities all day long. And I, I I don't know. I think on a daily basis, you're probably trying to have to circumvent those types of things, along with the aspects of AB5 and the contractor relationships, et cetera.
You know what? This is so this indirect source rule. This is it's a huge problem because who are they going to task with taking down the data, recording the data for these units that are entering and exiting these facilities? Who's the guy at the gate? It's usually security guard. You have to think about data accuracy if they're really trying to log this the right way. Um, a lot of these facilities can barely hire temp staff. So, if people are thinking, we're going to hire, quality individuals to make sure that all this is accurate and that it's being adhered
Hmm.
to, it's just, it causes congestion on roadways that lead into these facilities. I can't tell you how often, we go to a certain facility and there's 20, 30 trucks in line just to get in. And the sad part about that is that you actually have law enforcement agencies that are trying to prevent that very fact. It's impeding the flow of traffic. And what's the root issue of that? Well, we're trying to record this stuff for a state agency. So you got
Hmm.
state law enforcement agencies enforcing traffic laws for something that is put together by the state. And I bet
Right.
nobody from this law enforcement agency and nobody from the air quality board are talking to each other saying, hey, you know what, we're doing this thing, don't cite those individuals.
Yeah. Well,
It's like,
there's always a delta between, regulations and certifications and things that people want to put in place and then the actual enforcement of them, certainly. But everything's going big data. So somehow or another, these things, my suspicion is that what'll end up having is these, because the impetus of this is being put on the warehouses, right? So if the warehouses are required to keep it's something called wear points, and I won't get into the details on that, but it's a point system based on emissions from them, from all kinds of what kind of lighting do you have, what kind of emissions from machinery, how many propane tank, all this kind of stuff, and then also trucks in and out. And if the trucks in and out are a part of this, my suspicion is that the ones coming in and out better be placarded with something that says Smart Way, right, or something like that. Um,
you got
which
to
I
ask
believe
permission for
your
that.
company has that, right? Your company is part of that arrangement, and I would imagine that's kind of the way they're going to look at those kind of things.
Yeah, so we are a SmartWay certified carrier. The SmartWay program it's very good to have. In terms of the data that's reported back on the units, the consumption, the emissions,
Mhm.
the type of freight that you're hauling, weights, the average length of
Mhm.
haul, all that stuff gets recorded in order for you to certify as a smart weight-based carrier.
Right,
So,
right.
but you've got to ask them, the EPA, permission to put that smart weight logo on your rig. You can't just do it. They explicitly state that when they certify you.
Hmm.
So, I think about that and how we can best approach things with the warehouses. If contract carriers are rather dedicated carriers that are handling lanes at volume, always going to the same places, we could just share our fleet data ahead of time and say, hey, we're already registered. Whenever you see Lightning Express show up at your facility, we shouldn't have to wait. You know,
Hmm.
maybe there's two entrances to each facility, one to accommodate carriers that are kind of, the gypsies of the road, and one to accommodate dedicated carriers that are in and out of there every day.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that, well, there's going to be a certification process in a follow process. I guess the reason I even talk about these things the way I do is because I feel like that the amount of detail, the amount of regulation that's coming at the logistics transportation industry in general is huge and more complex every day. And I think that the technologies involved with understanding this, complying with things, and keeping track of all this is probably half the duty you have these days, is trying to manage these pieces to make sure that there's no holes in the puzzle you're looking at, and then doing the job that drayage people are supposed to do, and that's moving freight from A to B. And who knows where that'll go. It's really interesting to me that all this kind of stuff is happening, but to me, it all comes back to the same thing we talked about a few minutes ago, and that's keeping the driver the central part of what your thinking is as a company. That's my perspective. I don't run a drayage company, though. You do. And I know there's a ton of hats you have to wear, but from an outsider's point of view, the drayage companies that I like to deal with the most in my history are the ones that have a well-rounded customer service affect, and then drivers you can count on that you don't have to worry about when they're picking up at your facility or delivering to your facility.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the conversations we have between, the people who lead my dispatch department and,
Hmm.
drivers who tend to move on, or say a candidate that's not a very good fit for us, are along the line.
Hmm.
It starts with character and
Hmm.
responsibilities. Does a candidate, exhibit good moral character, and is that of a, responsible man or woman? Um,
Right.
I think those character traits, probably for any job, are something that any company looks for, but particularly for drivers, we're wanting to understand what their personal needs are, so that we're
Hmm.
aligning as a company. We're a local drayage company. We don't really do too much overnight freight. It's local. Early starts. A lot of people, especially today, have a spouse that maybe works a shift that's opposite of theirs because they've got kids at home that are doing Zoom learning. And so
Hmm.
oftentimes we hear from a driver, I have no issue starting at 3 a.m. as long as you can have me off by 4. I think that for local drayage companies, the sweet spot really is in a driver schedule that's, 10 to 11 hours max per
Hmm.
day. And then they're
So how does, not to interrupt you, but how does that work with all the ELD and HOS hours of service and electronic log data? How does that tie into the local drayage? Are there exemptions in distances and things like that that allow for longer periods of time? And how does that work?
Great question. So, as a short haul carrier, the ruling now, the federal ruling is 150 air mile rule. Anything below that mark as a length of haul that you're doing as a company would categorize you to be exempted from the use of ELDs.
Hmm.
You can have your drivers do, day slips. If for whatever reason they end up, going over, the 14 hours. There's adverse weather exemptions. I believe there's a
Right,
tool
right.
for 2 hour period that you can go over if there's adverse weather conditions. You know, could be rain, could be.
I know there's conveyance issues too, your personal conveyance, you know.
There is, you know,
So,
I'd say that whenever you encounter an inspection point and you say your personal conveyance after you've probably been working, you know, 10, 12 hours a day, they're going to dig a little bit deeper. However, you
right.
know, for us, you know, the best policy is just to adhere to the rules and make sure that, you know, your drivers are not violating that 11-hour drive time. They're taking their mandatory
Sure.
30-minute break, their rest breaks, you know, before
Yeah.
before before the fifth hour. Now it's recommended
Mhm.
if you're doing more than an 8-hour shift. If you're doing less than an 8-hour shift, then you don't need to take a rest break.
Yeah.
So there's exemptions. There's definitely carve outs. You know, for us as a local carrier, not too recently, we were going outside of the 150 air mile rule, which is actually 173 or so terrestrial miles. So
Mhm.
um, we're doing a drop and hook count that really pressed our drivers literally to, you know, it's a full day. You're
Mhm.
driving, you know, 10 hours a day, and it's a 14-hour shift if you encounter some traffic. Um, that being said, you know, we've always been ELD compliant because
Sure.
reality is if you're doing day slips, then when the authorities do their inspection, it just forces them to look at other ways you conduct your business. You know, they start digging a little deeper into the fuel logs. You know, your driver said he was
Sure.
here. Oh, over, you know, on your, how is it that he was up there when he was fueling down here at this time? And,
Right.
you know, it's just better, you know, I serve as a reminder to my drivers, you know, make sure you're logging your fuelings when you're at the fueling station. You got to drop down to on duty and put that you're at, you know, SE Fuels Montebello or wherever
Mhm.
one of our locations. We have a fuel contract with a certain
Mhm.
company, and they have, you know, several sites in Los Angeles, you know,
Sure.
Orange County. So those things are all key to making sure that when you know, when you're going through your compliance reviews, you're an honest company, you're a company that's doing things the right way, and you're not flying at the seam of your pants. So
And that's got to be a difficult part with our industry in general in many geographies where and there's a lot being done and there's a lot of proponents to the new contractor rules that are in place in California and AB5. You know, there was a kind of a stay by the courts, but now they rescinded that, and I'm sure it'll continue to go through the court system. But the whole relationship between employee model and contractor model is changing dramatically, and our industry will have to change with it. And I know from talking to you that you made that change probably a couple of years ago into the more of a W-2 direction, intentionally kind of using the foresight for this. But I mean, maybe we can finish off and you can talk a little bit about that, but also tell us a little bit more about your company and what you're specialists in.
yeah, absolutely. The you know, the AB5 ruling, I think it caught everybody by surprise when it first came out. You know, like you said, we were already compliant due to a number of factors. We Many of our customers reached out to us when they started hearing, you know, about it, because most of our customers are not even in California. They're, you know, in the Midwest and on the East Coast. And so when they start kind of hearing about this thing, they're like, what are you guys doing? And how are you guys handling this? And how does this affect the tenders that we send you guys?
Hmm.
Doesn't affect them at all. You know, I think they were very pleased to hear that we are compliant. You know, we're an employee-based company.
Hmm.
All of our, you know, tractors are seated by employees. And so when we do look at the contractor model, we handle that in a way that's very compliant. You know, we don't facilitate any of their work in a way where they're tied to us and they can't take work from somebody else. So I think at the end of the day, we just want to send a message that, you know, we're very strong with free market, but it needs to be done right and needs
Hmm.
to adhere to the policies of the state and the federal, you know, agencies. As far as, you know, as far as I go and the way we'll continue to manage that, you know, we stay very close to the information. we're all for helping an entrepreneur start his business. I oftentimes find myself giving free advice. A lot of people would disagree. They say, "Hey, your knowledge shouldn't be free. Your ability to help somebody start a business, you should charge for that." Oh, you know what? Yeah, probably I could do that, but reality is that I'm a servant. I'm here to help
Hmm.
others. I'm here to help people get ahead, and if they choose to partner with us, that's just a plus. That's a bonus for us. Uh,
Hmm.
one thing I can say about Lightning Express that is really different from a lot of other companies in Southern California is that we are dead honest. We are probably one of the more honest carriers out there. Some things we say you might not like, but you're always going to get the truth. And my staff here, we've we've got tons and tons of experience in dealing with the railroads, the piers, Port of
Hmm.
Long Beach, Port of LA. We go to all of them. We have drivers that know them all in and out. We know what their nuances are. Oftentimes you have problems within those terminals that some people might ask, what do I do next? Even drivers that have never worked intermodal before or harbor will ask, what do I do next? Well, here, you go to the trouble window and we're going to engage these folks and we're going to try to
Right.
resolve the discrepancy that's taking place because oftentimes you have marine terminal operators, but they're accepting certain steamship line boxes, but one hand doesn't know what the other's doing, and it does suck that the drayage company oftentimes has to be the buffer to connect the two or to resolve the issue ultimately to service the end customer who's a totally different party. Uh,
Right.
so that's the kind of service
But
you get.
that's exactly why they need companies like that, though, because they need the uh, the expertise and the execution. Right. You need both, and it sounds like you guys obviously have that.
We receive a lot of compliments from our customer base. Hey, we give it to you guys because you guys get taken care of, and we often don't even have to worry about it. Days later, they, hey, this is closed up already. It was taken care of. There's just so many variables, especially when it comes to the ISO boxes that we handle, the 40-foot boxes, the 20s,
Hmm.
45s. Uh, you really have to know that if, one place is just taking the container and they're not taking the chassis, you know, you might have a dispatch group that knows one location that they can take the chassis back to. The last place you ever want to take it back to is a yard because then you've got empty miles in two directions. You got a bare chassis coming one way and it's got to go back to a depot after that. And,
Wow.
oftentimes that's a flat fee that gets paid for by a
Hmm.
customer. So, uh, as a trucking company, we really are focused on making sure that it's done right the first time, and
Hmm.
that if something goes wrong, that you're getting an explanation for it that's going to
Right.
make sense to you.
Yeah. Yeah. That. Well, you heard it here, everybody. You're going to get the truth, right? And that. Yeah. And I know over my years in the transportation industry, a lot of people kind of skirt that, and it's refreshing to hear that from someone. And I'm sure that you and your company will do fantastic things moving forward. By the way, I love the painting in the background. It's fantastic.
Thank you. It actually represents family. So, uh,
Really?
I say, hey, when we hire people here, welcome to the family. We like to treat people like family. I hope that as we grow, as the years go by here, that we can continue to keep that family aesthetic.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much for spending some time with all of us today. Mr. Adan Zamora, Vice President of Lightning Express. And you can check them out where? You've got I think, an Instagram following and some other things going on, right?
Yeah, check us out on Instagram. Check us out at lightningexpress.com.
Okay.
Uh,
Perfect.
feel free to call our phone line, look us up. We're in Montebello. We are hiring drivers. We are hiring office personnel. Look us up. And if you want to come aboard to the winning team, we're here.
Go and grow. Nice. Very good. Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Well, guys, that's a wrap for today. It is, as always, a pleasure being with you, and we encourage you additionally to go any chance you get to our YouTube channel at JOZ Bytes. See some of the videos in the past. There's a lot of particular things that are coming to fruition that we talked about in terms of driver centrism. I mentioned it a little earlier in the podcast today, as well as the regulatory capture, some of the jobs plan stuff that the government is placing forward, some of the AB5 versus contractor deals that are creating a lot of havoc in our industry. So as usual, come to our website, www.ilevellogistics.com. Come see that aggregated website. Come learn, educate yourself, get a self-certification in logistics. Be an expert in your field. That's what having a career is. That's what moving forward, either as an entrepreneur or as part of a larger organization, is really all about. We encourage you to join us. Listen to the Apple Podcast or Spotify or any other number of podcast platforms that you may listen to. And again, be part of the family. We encourage you to subscribe and get a part of the daily subscription of information coming your way via email as well, email or text. So again, thanks a lot, and we'll see you very soon.